Patents aren't just legal documents. They represent million-dollar decisions. The Patent Matters podcast takes you behind the curtain and shares best practices. Hosted by the experts at Ensemble IP, we're having real conversations with innovators, patent attorneys, agents, and IP leaders who know the stakes and know how to win. Welcome to Patent Matters podcast. I'm Dave Hunt, here with special guest Carl Rosen, who's joining Brad Buehler and me for our first episode of Patent Matters. Carl Rosen is an IP and business strategist, formerly a lawyer who works across business, innovation, and IP. Carl frequently speaks about intangible assets, patent analytics, open innovation, the role of IP as a business asset, and, quite interestingly, IP of AI and AI of IP. At PA Consulting, Carl leads a multidisciplinary team of experts spanning IP, engineering, science, law, and corporate strategy. He helps governments and the private sector clients across the full IP lifecycle. You can see him in the boardroom, in the code room, or in the courtroom. Carl is a devout believer in IP, that it's not just a legal construct, but a dynamic, multidimensional instrument that intersects law, technology, and business, capable of shaping new commercial paradigms. Carl, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Brad. I'm really looking forward to diving into our conversation, see where that leads us. But also, I have to say, I'm really thrilled about what you guys are building, both with Quartet and Advanced AI Labs. I am certain that for those folks that don't yet know you, you will become a household name, powering some of our mighty IP institutions and helping everyone act on a professional patent search and discovery level. So super excited to be here. Let's dive into it.
Very good. So we're going to tag team, if it's okay, through this podcast. So Brad, I know there are a few things that you've been itching to ask of Carl as we get started.
Yeah, definitely. So excited to be here today with you, Carl. One of the things that I'm really curious about is, in your experience, I'm sure you've seen many different ways that patents have been leveraged. But you said to us before that patents help fuel sophisticated forms of finance and insurance products. I'd like to learn a little bit more about how they're used in finance and insurance. And is this a more recent development, or when did this first start to occur?
I would say that it's a recent phenomenon, but we need to first take a step back. So IP, specifically patents in this case, are multidimensional. The value of patents are not necessarily intrinsic, but more situational, contextual, and temporal. And it's primarily driven by how it's realized. And it can be realized through multifaceted approaches, but also through different avenues and channels. So what I'm trying to say here is that IP means different things to different people, even within, what would you say, coherent IP professional. So when it comes to new forms of sophisticated finance and insurance products, I would like to paint a taxonomy of three dimensions: debt, risk transfer, and legal finance. Debt, what we're seeing there is primarily IP as a means to secure debt financing through collateralization. Quite new, but really interesting form of accessing new forms of capital for SMEs primarily. Risk transfer has to do with, let's say, offsetting IP exposure, both, let's say, within and from external factors. And then legal finance, which is quite an interesting vehicle because it's been around for a long time, but now supercharged by patent litigation, where you have firms essentially financing litigation campaigns or single disputes where they hope to recoup or multiply the initial investment through settlement on the side or damages awards. And I know from pretty interesting sources that right now there are more capital looking for good patents than ever before. And that has obviously created a whole new nuance in what IP strategy, or patent strategy for that matter, actually means. What is an interesting way to, let's say, characterize and frame this interesting convergence is also to look at the financial institutions that are providing these services. Think about the big banks like JP Morgan, Bank of America, and so forth. Not only are they approaching patents through a more sophisticated lens, looking at how to unlock credit and equity, but also they are using them themselves as strategic assets to create moats and technology hegemony and superiority. So if you look at those IP departments within those institutions, they are among some of the most sophisticated patent filers, patent managers, and patent users. So I think that just captures this interesting convergence of how now patents are becoming something that intersects the entire innovation ecosystem and creating new forms and ways to realize that value.
So a follow-on question to that is you mentioned that this is, in the scheme of things, relatively recent. What do you think is driving that? Is it because patent data is becoming more easily accessible to these institutions and the business strategists that are in these institutions, as opposed to in the past when it was sort of tucked away in a legal function or in a research and development function?
Yep, most definitely. I think access to accurate, precise, and rich data is leading the way in how people both interact with IP, but also attribute to IP value. Today, we can, within seconds, using IP, SaaS platforms, and various patent analytics tools, essentially carve out technology domain, innovation ecosystem, and understand everything that goes on into that domain. Who's doing what, at what velocity, and what are the white spaces vis-a-vis the more crowded hotspots. But also understanding, let's say, the granularity of patents, backward, forward citations, how they relate to what has been and what is to come. And I think with that in mind, there's more rigor that goes into the analysis, and therefore more confident in that certain patents can indeed be attributed value and therefore also have fall within acceptable risk thresholds of underwriting finance. I would like to add there that that's obviously something that transcends the world of IP as a financial asset and has become far more important for the entire IP professional as such. I think one very important thing here, which I do with my team, is this exercise of constantly reconstruct and deconstruct the value narrative of why IP matters, using IP data and IP intelligence as a means to communicate that to different stakeholder groups, in particular in the boardroom.
If I could follow up, one of the pressing issues that we've seemed to have been dealing with for many years is what is the value of an individual patent? And a lot of folks have attempted to place a value or a methodology for determining that. I would imagine that it's easier to deal with a portfolio because in that case, you have multiple patents that you can consider, particularly if you're going to use debt financing. But have you seen some developments that have been promising in getting a more precise assessment of the value of an individual instrument or a portfolio? And if not, how are decision makers in the financial community coming at it with that data? What are they specifically doing that allows them to make a decision like that?
Yeah, I mean, patents are the trillion-dollar asset class that no one knows about. And more importantly, also struggles to value, which is quite interesting. There's a lot of valuation experts out there, self-appointed, but they all, what would you say, struggle with this conundrum, which is that a patent document is not something that holds intrinsic value. It depends on the context. It depends on the technology it reads on. It depends on where that technology is today, how adopted it is, who it constrains, what market it can move, and so forth. And more importantly, also how value is realized, because patent documents are negative rights. They are rights to exclude others. They require action. And certain actions may or may not be on the table. So I think when it comes to patent valuation, that is a Herculean challenge, because a patent can today be worth zero and tomorrow $100 million because something happened. Something triggered that demand for that very patent. I'm thinking in particular patents that are useful for counter assertions in lawsuits and risk deterrence and other situations. I would say that in terms of, let's say, the IP finance folks or the patent economists, they see the world through a different lens altogether. And I think what is important to just, keep in mind here is that IP is a control mechanism. It's a mechanism by which you can ensure exclusivity within a market, or even exclusivity to create a market. And there are various forms to drive and achieve control. IP happens to be one of those suitable instruments for that very purpose. Assigning value to, let's say, a naked patent portfolio, which is just the legal documents, just the legal rights to exclude others from practicing those inventions, that's a whole different, let's say, art form. Maybe a science form, but primarily an art form. Whereas when you look at a company that is operative, that is selling products, that is engaging in technology partnerships, driving innovation, then assigning value to patent portfolios becomes slightly easier.
I see.
Interesting. So you sort of need a little bit of a crystal ball as well, because your strategy comes in and what you're planning to do, both as a company from a strategic perspective, bringing the patents into that strategy determination. One of the challenges is, well, there's two challenges. You need to disclose your technology to file a patent application. To some extent, it needs to be disclosed. And then secondly, patent protection is jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So it is expensive to get, say, global coverage of your technology and your protection. What guidance is there for organizations, or do you see organizations taking into account when they're deciding how to create their patent filing and their portfolio strategies?
I think that's the key challenge there, understanding where to file, but also what to file. And we typically advise clients on various, let's say, issues pertaining to those challenges. Where do you have exposure? Where do you sell? Where do you ship? Where would you like to sue? Clearly, those are jurisdictions that you would prefer to own those assets in. But equally, when it comes to the technology, what technology is it that is visible from the point of sale? That if someone purchases your product or consume your service, they would be made privy to, either through means of reverse engineering or just interacting with the product as such. Clearly, there you need to have a different protection strategy than in respect to something which is behind a black box regime or back end, which is not necessarily visible through legal means of interacting with that product or service. So that's actually something which we are talking a lot about in the context of AI models. They tend to be governed by black box principles because there are actually no available public disclosure IPR regimes for those algorithmic, data-driven architectural assets that set one AI model apart from another. I think when it comes to filing strategy, you have to be aware of the parameters. More importantly, the world is constantly changing. Jurisdictions become more or less important. And today's global economy is both, let's say, technology specific and technology agnostic. Certain venues, certain jurisdictions are becoming increasingly important. For example, setting FRAND rates when it comes to cellular technologies, but equally because there's an increase of the consumption of products incorporating specific technology. Then, of course, you have the pro-patent or pro-injunction sentiment as well to factor into this. And I think, overall, there are some usual suspects among the top jurisdictions. A patent family will not be valued the same if it doesn't have a US family member. Goes without saying. But venues and jurisdictions such as Brazil, Netherlands, and so forth are interesting for various reasons. Their countries are obviously being constantly, let's say, rolled out because there's incentive to have an inbound of that type of interest and litigation. That apparatus is obviously bringing a lot of financial stimulus with it.
It seems to me that making these strategic decisions requires more than just patent people in the room. And I say that because I know of a story where a medical device company, pretty disruptive technology, where they had filed in the United States, a couple of countries in Europe, but specifically decided not to file in China. Their rationale was, our technology is core. We really don't believe that we're going to have a market in China, and it's something that we really not sure we can afford anyway. Afterwards, looking at the forward citations, there were many, many applications that were filed citing that technology in China, and quite a bit of interest in that company and its actual intellectual property. They are not covered in China now, but they have learned a lot from that company, and they could invent around or build the device in China without paying any royalties and turn around and sell it in the country where they also didn't file, which was in Brazil. At the time, it was basically the engineers and the medical experts and not business people who had made that decision. How does a company not make critical errors with patent strategy? You see it, you hear all these horror stories of the past, whether it be like, Xerox PARC losing their patent rights or making it available to companies like Apple and others. How does a company really avoid that? What are sort of steps that they can take to make sure they don't make those critical errors in where they're going to file and what they're going to file?
I think that's an excellent example that illuminates just how important it is to consider IP strategy as part of the business strategy, and that you define clearly what constitutes success and what role IP needs to play to achieve certain business objectives. I would like to answer this question by taking a step back and say, when it comes to technology, there's a lot of technology that is solutions looking for problems to solve. There's a whole lot of technology that is excellent, but extremely expensive to scale and manufacture or sell within cost profile. And then there's a lot of technology that is simply not controllable. You can't control the return on investment, and therefore it doesn't have longevity. So when we think about both business decisions, but primarily product design, we think about 3 dimensions: desirability. Does it actually solve a problem that consumers are willing to pay for? Feasibility, can we manufacture this at scale within cost? Viability, can we own it, make a business out of it, and generate longevity required to make it into a platform? That's an IP question. Viability is an IP question, both in respect to what is out there, third-party IP, competing, conflicting, complementary IP, but also whether you can, through that invention, generate your own IP and therefore also protect it and have an exclusive and proprietary claim to it. So patent strategy needs to be seen through those lenses. And there's many reasons why, let's say, a product and technology fail. But if you turn it around, one question that I shouldn't even say question, one statement that I often put forward to my clients is, IP only matters if you're successful. No one is going to copy a product that doesn't work or a service that does not sell. Simple as that. So if your goal is success, well, then clearly IP needs to be something at the very forefront of that process. You need to think strategically about it from the get-go. Now, I think that certain technologies have failed, both because of a lacking IP strategy and also because of various other factors. It's multifactorial. But I would say this, in order for something to become a growth platform, you need to have watertight IP. And that is a combination of knowing what to keep secret, knowing what to file, where to file it, understanding claim architecture. It's about being both, let's say, someone with a lot of depth, but with a lot of breadth. Understanding how, let's say, patent law intersects with technology and law, but also understanding what patents can actually be used for and to achieve. And that's really the key function of my team. It's a multidisciplinary team of engineers, scientists, designers, and corporate strategists, which share one characteristics in common, which is that we all believe that IP is the answer, or at least partial answer, to your question.
Tell us a little bit more about that team. How do you work? How do your people work together? Do you have people with specific expertise and then together as a group, it's multidisciplinary? Or do you look for individuals that have multiple skills and can apply them? So is the team well-rounded, or are the individuals themselves well-rounded?
Let's put it like this. For me to hire someone, that's an Herculean challenge because it takes me 6 to 12 months to find that person through active searching, because I'm looking for what can only be described as unicorns. I'm looking for people that has a T-shaped competence profile, breadth and then depth in one specific vertical. And that allows for that person to engage in orthogonal thinking, cherry picking from various principles and domains, building new, let's say, networks of thinking, connecting dots. So within my team, we have every single walk of life. And I'm very proud of that team, but it's a small, hyper-specialized team. Luckily, within the context of PA, we can scale that team at any given time because we have 4,000 scientists, engineers, and so forth at our disposal. Not everyone trained in the art of IP, but I think it's easier to make an engineer know about IP than the other way around. So I'm blessed in that way. Now, the team as such understands one point that I made earlier about this deconstruction, reconstruction of the value narrative. They know that IP is important for almost any corporate role and profession, but they also know that it's important because of different reasons. And you have to carefully frame it as such to those various stakeholder groups. And I think that's often something that is lost, and therefore there's a lack of translation from one profession to another. And I can see that in the boardroom, actually, when an IP department is finally invited to share some cool findings, to be part of that strategic conversation about where we're going and where we're heading. And they make a couple of fatal errors, and then they're never invited back again because they don't speak the language of the boardroom. They don't show the data required to make those decisions. And you need to convey that with confidence. And that was actually one of the key use cases of IP intelligence and patent analytics and that type of data, and in particular in a aesthetically appealing presentation. Now, going back to your question, I think that landscape is constantly changing, and my team and the footprint that we have within an organization such as PA is that we work both on pure IP matters, high stake contexts, litigation support, understanding the granularities of a particular patent, for example, but also as an embedded function in a much larger orchestration. For example, we advised on a massive multi-party technology procurement process. IP strategy in that context meant we don't want to have a vendor locking problem. We want to ensure that if this vendor that we choose would not provide satisfactory provision of services, that we don't have legal, strategic, technical, commercial barriers to shift to another vendor. That was the sole purpose of IP strategy in that context. Now, as an IP strategist, you typically talk about licensing support, deal making, not necessarily procurement. So it's all about ensuring that you speak the language of that stakeholder group, because I think that IP always matter. I'm a IP exceptionalist, which obviously align with the name of this podcast as well. But I think that's the type of competence that I want to see in the individuals that could contribute to the team that we have built. Also, it's a highly meritocratic team that we built. As a matter of fact, not even a single person in my team speaks English as their first language.
By the way, you described a person that's very similar to Brad, and I'm like, you're not allowed to have Brad. So Brad and I have been working for the last 5 years together in AI. Prior to that, we've been working together for about 27 years in IP. So it's at the intersection of IP and AI, and so much is going on. We've worked in search analytics. We're very familiar with how AI can be used for workflows in a patent department or in an IP department. But there's so much more that's going on with drafting and in other areas. Walk us through your vision of the potential of AI in IP and how that will change the landscape for corporations, for service providers, for software companies or platforms. Give us a little bit of that, and then tell us whether or not that's a threat to these wonderful people that you have at PA Consulting or elsewhere, or if that's a welcome development.
I think that for any T-shaped individual, AI is something that will supercharge their competence profile and ability to have impact at scale. They are super AI resilient and will not be made obsolete by generative AI or any similar AI capabilities because of their orthogonal thinking faculties. Now, in respect to what is happening in the world of IP and how AI-driven IP SaaS is transforming the IP value chain, I would say that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for individuals to get involved, to essentially carve out their own path for entrepreneurship or commercial exits, but also for corporates to finally become strategic about how they think and work with IP. I think that there's a pretentiousness, an esoteric pretentiousness within the IP profession. There's a lot of IP professionals who, of course, deem themselves as highly important, but they can't necessarily articulate their importance and significance within organizations. And I think that's obviously a lacking skill. And world which is transforming and ever unfolding at this velocity, I would say there's a low probability of them surviving as a profession. Now, embedding AI into your operation, something that must be, what would you say, not feared in abstraction. It's the natural evolution of how we as human beings both accelerate and ensure our human ingenuity. Both machine ingenuity and human ingenuity needs to work equilibrium. The patent profession is quite interesting because it's something which is, it spans from the legal industry. And the legal industry is one of those industries that are seeing the most disruption from AI. And in particular from the insider entrepreneurs, those lawyers that have really felt the pain points of workflows that no longer make much sense, have faced that problematic, let's say, way of working, and now are applying AI to solve those issues. And I think that that's quite interesting. And I would say that the legal tech world is increasingly becoming the next breeding ground of some phenomenal unicorns and companies that we will use as examples, business case study examples, many years follow. So really interesting when you think about that not only is it the IP profession as such, it's also the broader legal profession as such. And it is driven by, in part, what you and Brad are engaged in, your enterprise. Now, I would say that humans, they need to be still in the loop because this is critical decision making. Patent decision, as you have exemplified, David, is really something that can be the difference between success or failure. And I do believe that, to add another complexity dimension, it requires an expert to understand whether the AI operate at an expert level, which is quite interesting as well. So for those two, but also many other reasons, I think human in the loop, that's the way of doing it. But this embedding AI into operations for the sake of embedding AI into operations is also dangerous. One needs to have a clear value narrative, clear KPIs, understanding, what is actually the value of doing this, and am I doing things better? Am I doing things faster? Are they costing me less? It needs to be measurable. But in the case of the AI for IP, and in particular patents, that impact is across the value chain, be that patent creation, be that patent management, be that patent use, be that patent dispute. And I think that having now interacted with you guys for a while as well, I think what you guys are building is super interesting, because clearly there needs to be some form of technological backbone across that. And I can very much see that there's this up for grabs to become the Amazon Web Services of AI for IP. And I think that that's an area that I would be quite interested in focusing more on as well. Instead of building, what would you say, like vertical competition, a product that is similar, but maybe solving the same problem slightly differently. I think one can actually go in for a horizontal grab-all approach.
So that's interesting you bring up legal tech and legal services being the most impacted by AI. And this flows into, we've been talking a lot about patent strategy from a business strategic standpoint. How about from a prosecution level standpoint? So taking it back to the actual prosecution process of a patent. And this is where we're seeing a lot of AI, whether it's AI drafting of applications, automated patent searching. What we see is the need to get the right patent surfaced at the right time to file an application that is strong when it comes out of the patent office. Does that level of discussion make it into the boardroom at this point? And should it be in the boardroom?
I think that's really the key question, right? Finding the right patent at the right time for the right reason, and defining those parameters, understanding what those characteristics look like so that you indeed can find them. In the boardroom, I think what really is the conversation there is about future proofing, understanding that things are changing quite dramatically, and there's a lot of technology, but also industry convergence. Just take the financial sector as an example. Every single bank is becoming a technology company, but also every single technology company is becoming a bank. So clearly their IP becomes something more of a, both, let's say, data indicator of where certain things may be going due to our advanced ways of analyzing patents in aggregate, but also as a means to future-proof the business, protecting revenue streams, ensuring that you have tech under the hood that is exclusive and proprietary to you, but also ensuring optionality, because controlling something ensures that you can decide whether that's a closed or an open innovation ecosystem. And I think that that's actually a point which is increasingly being made in let's say, C-suite settings, releasing it into the wild, building an ecosystem that way, or keeping it proprietary. But it's an aspect which is lost in many discussions, which is that to actually provide something as open source, it needs to be an underlying proprietary claim. It needs to be underpinned by an IP right, because you can't really host an open house party at your neighbors without their consent, right? That's just trespassing. So, and something is not open just because you say it's open. It's because you have the right to make it open, and that you can force others to continue that openness and open history of it. So I think, what people are becoming aware of is that IP is definitely something that can be used in a great variety of ways. It has great versatility. Then connecting it to where we started, we also have more people that are well versed in speaking that multi-dimensional language to essentially traverse those prior to, let's say, these really key convergence points, more siloed and isolated industries and technologies. And I think that's key in those contexts as well.
Yeah, I think by taking a multidisciplinary approach, that's how you can advise folks to be more holistic, and you can cover all the bases, so to speak, to make sure that you're confident that your strategy makes sense and that it can be implemented well, and that you've thought of all the different ramifications of it. So it seems like a smart approach. I think the difficulty with IP and with AI is that there's so much to do. There's just so much to do, and then prioritizing what to focus on and what to focus on first, particularly for someone like yourself. So, you're an advisor and a consultant. In our case, we build software, but we've come from the service environment as a patent search company when we owned land and IP for corporations, law firms, and the U.S. Patent Office. But just prioritizing what to build and when to build it and what to focus on first and second requires a lot of effort and a lot of thought, sometimes as much as the actual building. Do you have any tips for organizations to prioritize either with their IP or with what they're building for IP?
That's a great question, and also just highlights the opportunity at hand, that this is indeed an industry, a landscape ripe for new ways of working, new operating models, and also new technology to assist across the patent or IP value chain. When it comes to onboarding of new technology, I think you have to understand what it is that motivates those companies, those actors. And it's often speed, reduced time to market, increased, let's say, velocity, ensuring that they can roll out something before their competition. Here, actually, in-license, or the act of in-license technology, doing in-licensing is increasingly a topic which we discuss with our clients, what to build self and what to in-license. And what in the technology stack do you actually need to have homegrown, and what can be relied on a third party? So that's like tech stack design, not necessarily the technology as such, but more like where does it come from, and is it interoperable? But I would say when it comes to patent search and patent discovery, which you guys have started focusing on, that's something that cuts across the entire patent value chain, because every single patent decision starts with a search, right? You need to understand what the landscape looks like, and then from there extrapolate, infer certain insights that are then incredibly important for, let's say, actions specific to patent creation or patent management or use. So that's the right angle. But I think in terms of features and product design, I know that with the advanced capabilities of AI, we can make everyone an advanced IP professional. Everyone can soon operate at that level. And I think that that's the true democratization of, let's say, IP intelligence, but also realizing value from patents, but also through patents. And that's something that really excites me. And when I speak to, for example, R&D folks, even marketing people that are very engaged in doing horizon scanning, Horizon 1, 2, 3, what are our consumers looking for? How are they changing? Where does product design land in those horizons? What are the requirements for a successful, desirable product in those horizons? When I tell them about patent data as a key indicator to be considered as part of that, they are mighty excited. But clearly, they are struggling to make use of it the best way because they lack the entire educational backbone and context you need to fully make use of it. But to then launch features that are not necessarily designed specifically for IP professionals, but for everyone else to operate on the level as an IP professional, that's super exciting. And I think that that's going to be the key catalyzer for many IP SaaS platforms. And that actually starts with the question, who are you building for?
It's a really important point because I remember, I'm dating myself now, but when the Apple IIe came out, it was quite a device. But there was so much that you had to do with a computer at the time. Like there are times where I would actually open up a computer and I would be a hardware expert, and then I'd have to insert the software and the floppy disk, and I'd have to do this and that. And now you then move to like plug and play. For our industry, so much has been done by the experts so that if you're democratizing it, you have to have a lot more plug and play. You have to make it simpler, even for very intelligent engineers and marketing people, to just get an answer and to be able to not have to worry about what a class or a subclass is, or worry about all the different jurisdictions, or the details of doing a freedom to operate study yourself thoroughly and knowing all the details. So it's almost like doing a lot more guiding and hand holding for those who are going to be the recipients of patent information and be able to make a decision. And I think that was a surprise to us. It also was a surprise to find out that the system that we built, Quartet, while fantastic for a person who is a patent professional, getting it in the hands of other people that are not patent professionals and getting them to get the most out of it required some more effort. So instead of building a search yourself, it'll build the search for you. It allows you to work with other people more effectively. Like the workflow management capabilities that it has all came because companies and law firms had said to us, yeah, I care more than just the search. I want to know, I'm sharing this information with other people. And this is what happens down the chain. And you need to know about it so that I actually have a tool that could be in the hands of people who aren't doing the heavy lifting on the search or the analytics themselves. So this has been a great discussion. We really appreciate the opportunity that you've spent with us. I could sit here, and I know Brad and I could both sit here, right, Brad? We could sit here for hours.
Exactly.
We love to learn, and we believe this is going to be edifying, not just to obviously us, but all the folks that listen in. Love your practice, love what you're doing, love your enthusiasm, and your ability to sort of cut through a lot of noise to give clear direction to the organizations and the individuals you give direction to. So it's been a real pleasure, Carl, to have you join us, and we hope you'll be back, and we hope to see more of you in the future.
Thank you so very much. It's been an illuminating conversation. Great questions, start to finish. Yeah, I'm a reformed lawyer, really enjoying this renaissance of what IP and AI and IP actually do and how they interact with one another. So I think there's not been a more exciting time to be someone who combines different perspectives and apply into this domain. And I think what you guys are building is truly revolutionary, I have to say. So great conversation. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carl.